Excellences, Mesdames, Messieurs, chers collègues, chers étudiants, c'est un réel plaisir pour moi, au nom du Centre d'études juridiques européennes de l'Université de Genève, de vous accueillir ce soir pour cette conférence sur le changement climatique, un sujet au cœur de l'actualité planétaire, si on peut le dire ainsi. Cette conférence est organisée dans le cadre du programme en anglais, The Master of Advanced Studies in European and International Governance, qu'on appelle le MEIG Programme, à l'occasion du lancement d'un nouveau module de 2 semaines sur le changement climatique. Et donc, c'est aussi à l'occasion de l'ouverture de ce module qui correspond à l'ouverture du semestre de printemps et des cours dans notre université, semestre de printemps qui a commencé hier. Donc, le double motif d'avoir cette introduction. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it was just a few words in French to welcome our students from the law faculty and from the Global Studies Institute of our university on top of our MEIG participants, which are our usual, I would say, participant for these series of lectures on governance issues. It's a pleasure and a privilege to welcome you in the name of the Center for European Legal Studies of the University of Geneva. And what I was mentioning in French just before is that this conference is the event to launch a new module on climate change in the MEIG program, but the date corresponds also to the beginning of the spring semester of our university. So it is really very important for us, as it is, as you know, and mentioned also just before, a plenary news and fundamental issues to deal with in our time. Before introducing our guest speakers of tonight, I would like first to invite the Dean of the Law Faculty, Professor Bénédicte Foy, to say a couple of words in the name of the university and in the name of the Law Faculty. Please, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, chère Christine, cher professeur Cadous, monsieur le secrétaire général, mesdames et messieurs, chères étudiantes et chers étudiants, chers collègues, c'est un plaisir et un honneur que de vous souhaiter la plus cordiale des bienvenues à cette conférence. Nous allons assister à ce qui pourrait être qualifié en quelque sorte de leçon d'ouverture du semestre pour le Centre d'études juridiques européennes et pour le MEIG, le Master in European and International Governance. Et le thème de cette leçon est tout à fait approprié, Climate Change and Disasters. Approprié à cause de son actualité, bien sûr, mais approprié également par l'intérêt que ce thème présente pour chacun d'entre nous et approprié aussi par l'orateur qui nous fait l'honneur de présenter cet exposé ce soir. Vous l'avez compris, il s'agit du professeur Petteri Taalas, qui est secrétaire général de l'Organisation météorologique mondiale. We are looking forward to hearing your presentation, Mr. Secretary General. Indeed, the quantity of disasters is linked to climate change, and it is growing. Melting glaciers, of course, and the rise of sea levels and of temperatures, but also droughts and flooding and heat waves as well. And I should also mention the big fires, such as the ones recently in Australia. And the list could go on. So we look forward to hearing you, dear Professor Taalas, and we hope you can give us some answers building on the expertise and the experience of the World meteorological organizations some answers which I hope will be encouraging ones. I wish to all of you a very interesting and rewarding conference, and I thank you for your kind attention.
So thank you very much, Mr. Dean, for these nice words on the topic and on our guest speaker. It is a pleasure for me to welcome Professor Taalas tonight for this conference on climate change and disaster. As Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization, he is at the center of all governance issues about climate change. It is the heart of what is going on in climate change in the Geneva International. The topic is so important today that we have another conference, by the way, at the university next week. So we can see the importance of this topic today between the different university community here at the university, but also at other entities in Geneva. Professor Taalas was appointed in May 2015 as the Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization. And he was reappointed in June 2019 for another 4-year mandate. He was born in Finland and holds a PhD in meteorology of the Helsinki University. Before joining the World Meteorological Organization, he was Director General of the Finnish Meteorological Institute between 2002 and 2005, and also between 2007 and 2015. He had various responsibilities before the mandate of Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization in different international entities. And also at the national level, he was the director of the Finnish Institute on Meteorology for many years. And he was, before acting as Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization, he was the principal delegate of Finland to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is, of course, the intergovernmental entity which deal with climate change. And he was the principal delegate of Finland from 2007 to 2015. He was also a member of different boards of directions, different companies, before, of course, having the mandate, but in the field of energy, of course, linked with climate change. So you have a guest speaker of first exposure to climate change issues with, and this is very interesting, with a profile of physician in meteorology, so a PhD from the scientific hard knowledge of meteorology, and working in governance in the same field, because heading this World Meteorological Organization is, of course, about governance, rules, governance system, and this, of course, brings you to, I would say, a full knowledge and experience on climate change issue, and we look very much to listening to you, to this presentation, and to exchange with you, because there will be a question and answer session after the presentation. So thank you very much for accepting my invitation, and we are all looking to listening to you for this speech. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Christine, and thanks for your kind words, and thanks for the invitation for WMO to collaborate with the University of Geneva, and we are really happy to contribute to your course, and we are looking forward to have a close partnership with you also in the future, and thanks for the Dean for the invitation as well. And I'm happy to see also the students of the course that you are going to attend during the coming weeks, and we have many of the best WMO staff members present here, and they will tell you everything about climate change, so you will be real experts on climate change after that course. So my background was already told, and I also have some scientific background. I used to be a real scientist before becoming a bureaucrat, and I have been a bureaucrat since 2002 at the national level, and for the past 4 years also bureaucrat at the WMO. So WMO is the United Nations Specialized Agency on Weather, Climate and Water, and we are the second oldest organization in the UN family. Somebody might say that we are fossil, but we think that we are still full of energy, and we are very much coordinating the global weather, climate and water observing systems, and we are also the founding father of IPCC. We had our first World Climate Conference in '79 when a group of scientists realized that we may have a problem related to the fossil fuel emissions coming from especially carbon, and then they decided to establish IPCC to provide scientific reports for the governments. And what is special feature at WMO that we are fairly freely exchanging our data worldwide. That's the backbone of weather forecasting, and we are also fairly freely exchanging know-how. We are working like a family organization, I would say. We are working in all parts of the world. We have 10 regional offices in different parts of the world, and we have just established a new office to Addis Ababa to serve especially to play a role with the African Union, and we have also a new office in Singapore, which is serving our Asian and Pacific regions. These are our missions. We are dealing with climate monitoring and climate research. We are also dealing with weather, climate and hydrological services, which our members are providing. We have 193 members, and then we have Earth system observations. I will show you what kind of observations we are having, and we have been setting standards for the observations so that you can compare measurements in various countries, and you can, for example, detect the small signal of climate change. And then we have about 100 of our members who are benefiting from further development of the services, and we are working together with development partners like World Bank to get resources floating for that purpose. And here are some examples of why WMO is so essential. So weather forecasting wouldn't be possible without us. You need global data for that purpose, and you need standardized data. Aviation wouldn't be possible without our services. Climate science, I would say that almost half of the climate science is coming from our community, and this data sharing I already mentioned. And here are some examples of the customer sectors of the National Meteorological Services and energy, agriculture, health, and all means of transportation. They are benefiting from those services. We have our members are coordinating this global observing system where we have ground-based measurements. We have scientific measurements like greenhouse gas monitoring. We have balloon-borne measurements, the vertical distribution of the atmosphere, and the big countries, big member countries, they have satellite programs, and we have coordinated so that not everybody is monitoring the same thing. And the standard setting, that's highly important, that we have to be sure what we measure, and for example, this climate change signal is so small that you wouldn't be able to extract it without these kind of standards. We have global observing system, and depending on the wealth of the countries, the amount of observations is varying. And European countries, Japan, North America typically have a very dense network of stations, and we have some limitations with the data availability, especially from Africa, some parts of Americas, and also from the Pacific islands. So we still don't have the optimal setup of observations. Then we are dealing with modeling with the laws of physics. We can create models which are used for weather forecasting business, and they are the same physics. You can create models for estimating what's going to happen to the climate in the future, and you can carry out the studies where you vary the emissions, for example, and that's one of our businesses. And the scales are ranging from minutes, which are this kind of typhoon scale things, and then we have weekly scale, yearly scale, seasonal scales, and up to centuries. And when we talk about climate change, typically these decades and centuries that we are talking about. And what we are very much interested in is to create the so-called multi-hazard early warning services, and also estimate the impact of the disasters. And for example, there was cyclone Idai hitting Mozambique a year ago, and the meteorological service of Mozambique was able to provide all the meteorological parameters more or less okay, but nobody understood what is the impact of such a thing. And that's why there were plenty of casualties and plenty of economic losses, because the country didn't act when this forecast was out. And that's one of our challenges. We have about half of our members don't have proper impact-based forecasting. And nowadays, what is happening is that it's not necessary that every country has their own forecasting system, but we have global centers which are able to provide fairly good forecasts. And in Europe, for example, we have ECMWF in Reading, which is providing the best forecasts in the world, and those forecasts are made available worldwide. And we have these centers in the most advanced member countries, and they are typically freely exchanging their products, and that's useful for all of our members. And this is the final slide about WMO. We are carrying out a major reform of our business at the moment. We used to have, for example, 8 technical commissions dealing with various fairly narrow sectors, and now we are having only 2 of them, one dealing with Earth system observations and services, and one dealing with services. And then we are engaging also scientific sector more in our work. We have established scientific advisory panel consisting of 15 world-leading experts who are giving us guidance, and then we are also engaging private sector in our work. We have, for example, big US companies, IBM and Google, which are providing our type of services. And capacity development is highly important for us, and that's why we have close cooperation with World Bank, Green Climate Fund, UNDP type of players, and also European Union. And we are very much working together with other UN agencies, and we are also carrying out the major reform of the Secretariat at the moment. So this is our vision, that at the moment we used to run a little bit chaotic system, and our constituent bodies will be nice and smooth in the future, and also our Secretariat is supposed to come from historical era to future, and that's what we are carrying out at the moment. Okay, let's go to the disasters. So some of you are dealing with economic issues, and our issues are also handled at the Davos meetings on annual basis, and for the past 4 years they have estimated that the issues that we are dealing with at WMO, they are biggest risks for the global economy, and those are natural disasters, failure of climate mitigation, extreme weather, and also water stress. So those are very likely things to happen, and their impact is also fairly high. So the economic community nowadays more and more understand that climate change and disasters are a major issue when it comes to finance. And if you look at statistics for the past 10 years, about half of the world population, they have been exposed to major disaster. For example, here there was a major disaster in 2003 when there were plenty of casualties because of the heat wave. And the most common disaster that people on this planet have been facing is related to flooding. Number 2 is drought, and thereafter storms. And almost all of the natural disasters, they are related to weather. And I will soon show you what is happening to the numbers of those, as the Dean was already referring to in his introduction. And if you look at the disasters and how expensive they have been, so far the most expensive one has been Hurricane Katrina, which was destroying large parts of New Orleans. And to be honest, New Orleans is a little bit the wrong place to live. It has been destroyed every 50 years historically, and it may happen once again in the future. And most of these disasters, they are related to hurricanes in the Caribbean, and there are a couple of flooding events, one which was hitting China and one which was hitting Thailand. And if you divide these disasters with the size of the economy of the countries, you can see that again these hurricanes are dominating ones here, and for example in 2017, Sint Maarten was losing almost 800% of their GDP in one day, and Dominica was losing 260% of its GDP in 2017, and two years earlier 90% of its GDP, and of course those kind of countries, they're getting quite desperate when it comes to the future. And once we have more warm seawater, we have more potential for these kind of storms. So climate change is affecting also those things. The Dean was referring to the fact that we have seen growing amount of disasters, and this is a statistic coming from Munich Re, which is one of the major insurance companies, and we have seen especially growth in the amount of storms and flooding events, which are the green and blue bars here, and there has been also a slight increase in the amount of heat waves and drought, which is the orange part of the graph here. And if you look at the disasters for the past 5 years, you can see that we have seen economic losses, especially in Caribbean and also in Asia, and we have seen casualties both in Europe and Asia, and a little bit less casualties in North America. And in Africa, the numbers are small, but the economies also are there fairly small. So the African economies may be hit fairly hard when there's a drought event or flooding event hitting the country. And at the moment, they have also other type of challenges, especially in Eastern Africa. We are producing on annual basis a report on status of climate, and we will release the next one together with Guterres in New York in March, and this is from last year's report. We have seen 1.1 degree warming so far, and if you look at the graph, it's fairly solid increase of temperature for the past 50 years, and so far the warmest year was in 2016 when so-called El Niño was boosting the temperatures, especially in the Pacific Ocean. And last year was the second warmest year on record, and all of the last 5 years have been the warmest years since 1850. And if you look at the global map where this warming has been taking place, you can see that Arctic has been warming the most, and second area where we have seen warming, especially in summertime, is the Mediterranean region. And there's an anomaly in North Atlantic which is related to the slowing down of the ocean current from Caribbean towards Europe, but this overall warming in the Arctic is so strong that you cannot see the continental Europe. And these changes in the Arctic, they are also having effect on the weather patterns in whole northern hemisphere, and some of the unusual both summer anomalies and winter anomalies, they have been related to the changes in the dynamic of the northern hemisphere because of the Arctic warming and melting of the snow and ice from there. We are also monitoring the global greenhouse gas concentrations. We have about 400 stations which are reporting those, and we are calculating the averages. And unfortunately, we have been breaking records year by year in all of those three greenhouse gases, and out of those, carbon dioxide is the most important. It has contributed about 2/3 of the warming so far, and its impact in atmosphere remains for hundreds of years. So that's a problem that doesn't go away if we would stop emissions tomorrow. And the more we emit the carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, the longer it will take to go back to the normal level. Methane is number 2. It has contributed about 17% of the warming, and its lifetime is about 12 years. So that's a problem that can basically be solved more quickly than the carbon dioxide problem. And then we have third one, nitrous oxide, which is very much coming from the agricultural land. We have stored actually the most of the extra heat that we have produced to the planet to the oceans. More than 90% of the extra heat has been stored in the oceans, and so far the oceans have warmed by about half degree. And this is contributing to the sea level rise, and it's also contributing to the area where we can expect to see tropical storms. For example, it was very unusual to see tropical storm hitting Mozambique, which was the case. There were actually a couple of them hitting Mozambique last April. Sea level rise estimates, they are still fairly uncertain. So far we have seen 26 centimeters sea level rise, and this is from one US study where they estimate that the range is now from about half meter to up to 2.5 meters, and this 2.5 would be reached by the end of this century if the melting of Antarctic glacier would take place more quickly than earlier thought. But this is an area where we have lots of uncertainty, but recent findings have discovered that melting of Greenland glacier has been speeding up. There has been tripling of the melting speed during the past 10 years, and also the Antarctic glacier has started melting. So these numbers may be higher than for example, at the IPCC report 4 years ago. And we have lots of areas worldwide which are sensitive to sea level rise, and especially in Asian areas we have lots of population, and we have lots of population which are living on the coastal areas, and China, Japan, Vietnam, Thailand, India, and Bangladesh, Pakistan. They are the most sensitive ones when it comes to amount of population which are exposed to sea level rise. But we have individual cities also, other parts of the world and low-lying areas, and for example, Netherlands is very much concerned of the sea level rise, but we have some cities like London, New York, Los Angeles, which are also sensitive to this change. And as I already showed, we have seen the largest changes taking place in the Arctic, and so far we have been melting about 75% of the sea ice mass from that part of the world, and so-called multi-year ice has practically disappeared. In the past, we used to have plenty of 2-year, 3-year, and 4-year old ice, but nowadays we mostly have 1-year-old ice left. And the glaciers worldwide, they are melting, and of course you can see what's happening here in the Alpine region, and there has been even a drop during the past 20 years, and these glaciers are source of fresh water for many rivers worldwide, and especially China, India, and some Latin American countries are very sensitive to those changes. So the availability of fresh water in the rivers is at the risk at the moment. Sometimes especially in USA, they're talking about global warming, and perhaps the biggest impacts of climate change have been felt through changes in precipitation patterns. And here is a map showing what has happened to global precipitation during the past decades as compared to the early part of last century. And you can see that, for example, Africa, some parts of Southern Asia, and some parts of Latin America, they have been getting drier, and at the especially high northern latitudes, we have seen an increase in the amount of rainfall. And as a result of both drought and heat waves, we have started seeing more dramatic forest fires, and I'm sure that you all are aware of the forest fires that are still going on in Australia, and there have been fairly massive forest fires in Russia, Canada, Sweden, and California, and in Australia, Russia, and Canada, the emissions coming from those forest fires, they have been exceeding the annual carbon emissions from other sources. So these are fairly massive emissions as well. And of course, they're having impact on human health and nature, and the people have suffered because of poor air quality. And it will be interesting to see the statistics from Australia, what kind of health impacts those fires have finally had. In Russia, for example, when there was a heat wave in 2010 and severe forest and peat fires, there were 50,000 casualties because of the heat and poor air quality. And as I said, if you look at the Arctic area, we had record-breaking emissions coming from the forest fires 2018, and because of the higher temperatures and more prevailing drought, this may continue in the future. Our partners are also contributing to our annual State of Climate reports, and the World Health Organization is estimating what kind of health impacts the climate change has had so far. And the estimation was that last year there were 220 million people who were exposed to major heat wave, and also the weather variations, they are having effect on several diseases, for example, dengue fever and so forth. And air quality is also one of the things that we are dealing with, and we are especially concerned of the ultrafine particles. There are natural sources of those particles. The upper graph you can see lots of color in Saharan area and some desert areas. That's sandstorm coming from those areas. But if you go to, for example, China, most of the East Chinese problems are related to human-induced emissions. And same is true for India and Pakistan, for example, where this is a major problems, and they are exceeding the European air quality standards by 20-fold in the worst cases. In Europe, the worst area is Po Valley, where we have lots of industry and emissions, and also the meteorological conditions are preventing ventilation of that area. And in Poland, which is very much relying on coal-fired energy technology, we have also fairly poor air quality at the moment. And this is also one attraction to mitigate climate change. Once you reduce the emissions, you can also improve the air quality, which has been very much happening already in Western Europe, for example. Then our partner FAO is estimating what's happening to global hunger, and there has been a long-term declining trend of hunger, but during the past years we have seen a slight increase again, which is related to climatic conditions according to FAO. And our partner IMF is estimating what is the impact of climate change on economy, and this is estimate what this 1 degree warming has, what kind of impacts the 1 degree warming has had on global economy. And you can see the red color, which is negative impact, and then green color, which is positive impact. And the high northern latitudes have benefited. The growing season is longer, the forests are growing better, and you need less energy for heating. And large parts of the developing world and some more developed areas like Australia, they have already suffered because of this change. And this is not only temperature change; it's very much also rainfall driven. And this is an estimate of what might happen to the global agriculture if we would reach 3 degrees. And 3 degrees are the pledges that countries have made as part of their Paris Agreement promises, and this is an estimate of what might happen there. And you can see lots of red color, which indicates that we would lose crop yield, and again, southern hemisphere and large parts of the areas where we produce food for the growing world population, they are reddish. And those areas which are greenish here, the soil is not the most fertile for complementing the losses of in the other parts of the world. And this is, to me, the major risk related to climate change, and it should be the main motivation behind climate mitigation. Then we have also a problem related to population growth, especially in Africa and some parts of Asia, and at the same time the climate is changing towards less comfortable direction, and you can see these blackish or dark areas, especially in Africa and in some parts of Middle East and Southern Asia. So those are the areas which are vulnerable to water crises, and the population growth is not making the things easier. And in the home country of Christine, for example, it's quite dark color, so tell your countrymen to do something about that. And finally, I would like to say a few words about the climate mitigation, so how the emission situation looks like, and I'm very much concentrating on carbon dioxide, which is the major driver behind climate change. And here you can see what has happened to the emissions since the 60s, and classically USA and Western Europe were the major emitters, and now China has become number one, and there has been also fairly steady growth in the non-OECD countries, which is demonstrating that if we would like to solve this problem, we have to have global action. And whom to blame about these problems? For example, this is demonstrating how the goods are consumed worldwide, and you can see that, for example, China is producing lots of products that we in Europe and also the North Americans are consuming. So this is demonstrating that the consumers have potentially a big role to play. And if you look at the fossil product flow in the similar way, you can see that there's lots of consumption of fossil resources from Middle East and Russia, which are again used by North Americans, West Europeans, and Japan. So again, our type of countries have a big role to play here. And what is happening worldwide is that the global energy demand is has been growing. There was a turnaround of the economy in 2015 and 16, but since then we have seen an increase, and in 2018 this growth was comforted mostly with fossil resources. Gas is better fuel than oil or coal, but still that was the dominant one. There was a growing amount of renewables and nuclear, which are climate-friendly solutions, but even coal-fired power plants were built, especially in China and in India, and that has continued also last year. IPCC produced its 1.5 degree report 1.5 years ago, and there they estimated whether it's possible to reach 1.5, which is the low limit of Paris Agreement, and also a very ambitious target. And to reach that, we should follow this green curve here, which means that we should turn this emission growth to a downward path in the coming 5 years, and we should become carbon neutral by 2050. And if we would like to reach the upper limit of Paris Agreement, we have 15 years time to bend the curve, and then we should become carbon neutral by 2070s. And if we don't do anything, we could reach 3 to 5 degrees warming by the end of this century, and 8 degrees by the end of next century if we would use all of the known fossil fuel resources. And this is the challenge that we are having. At the moment, 85% of the global energy that we use in industry, households, and transport system is based on fossil energy. It's coal, oil, and gas, and only 15% is based on nuclear, hydro, and renewables. And to be successful in climate mitigation, we should revert those numbers in the coming decades to produce most of our energy based on nuclear, hydro, and renewables. And this is the vision of European Union. They have their Green Deal, which they are preparing at the moment, and the aim is to become carbon neutral by 2050. And this is demonstrating what is the magnitude of various things behind such a target. The number 1 is power production, number 2 is transport sector, and number 3 is industry. And then we have others which are smaller components as compared to that. And then we should also enhance the carbon sink a bit, which is this dashed the green area. And so far, there's not the belief that we could use some means to extract the carbon dioxide from the emissions, nor remove carbon from the atmosphere. That's the dashed red line here, which is a minor thing so far. And finally, my conclusions: climate change is very visible already, as I was demonstrating to you, and it's also fairly high on the global political agenda. Citizens are talking about it, the governments are talking about it. In the UN, it's perhaps number 1 item at the moment, and also private sector is growingly paying attention to climate mitigation. And we have both technological and economic means to be successful in climate mitigation, and the key areas are energy production, transport sector, buildings, and also bioeconomy is an opportunity when it comes to mitigation means. And this transition is not so much favored by fossil-based companies, nor some countries where the major income is coming from fossil business. And the political acceptance, that's a challenging thing. We have seen this Gilets jaunes movement here in neighboring France, and there was a proposal to raise the diesel price a bit, and people started demonstrating. Of course, in France, they're always demonstrating, but that's a different story. But this is demonstrating that it's fairly sensitive. And this 1.5 is extremely challenging target, and some countries countries are not favoring that kind of target at all. And so far, these Paris pledges that countries have made would mean 3 degrees warming, and the progress to achieve 3 degrees hasn't been great so far either. And we have to also pay attention to climate mitigation. This negative trend in climate will continue for the coming decades, and we have to adapt as well. And then finally, population growth is also is an issue that we should talk about, and we will have more consumers, but we will also have more people who are suffering because of climate change, and especially African population is growing, and there we may have a growing amount of victims of climate change. And I'm a little bit concerned that this situation has led to a panic among the young people. We don't foresee that there would be end of the world or total disappearance of human beings from this planet, but this is a serious issue that we should tackle, but I'm not personally favoring this kind of panic approach that some young people are having. So with these words, thanks for listening to me, and Katrina said that there would be some sort of question and answer. Thank you.